what a beautiful motto. But now I got some fresh money, and that's it. How can you mind if I split? Going back where a woman knows how to treat a man. Hey, keep her friendly. They got no hidden plan. It is the best in the Midwest. A real down city full of good folks no home. When I get back, I'll never roam from my Chi-town. So long, farewell, I'm gonna see you later. On to Chicago. Oh, yeah, going to Chicago. Oh, yeah, I'm never in Chicago.
Thank you so much, Rich. Wow. Old Dean of the Medical School and big show there. So, Doreen,
Beautiful.
what a way to kick this off.
Yeah, what a way to kick this off. That's right. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. We good? Yeah. Okay. So here we are. Does everybody know what day of the festival we're in? Day 7. This is day 7. 10 days. And we are delighted to have all of you with us for the 39th Discover Jazz Festival. Hard to believe. Every time I say it, I'm like, could that be real? This is a very special year. Having Michael Wenso and Jono Gasparini with us as the curators has been a treat, and it has really informed a unique festival. And I was saying to Michael yesterday during one of his listening sessions, I said, you know, we really didn't think about how important it would have been to have his whole band come to the Sneakers Jazz Band or to the reunion at Big Joe's Cafe, because it's sort of like bringing together more than 2 generations of musicians, and I think they would have really enjoyed it. But it's been a busy week, and you know, everybody can't stay out till 2 every morning. But
and you know this how, Doreen?
Say it again.
Because you're there too.
Yeah,
Just say.
I did. It was very hard last night. But let's talk about today. So this is the launch of a new project that the Flynn and BCA are doing, which is to create an archive of the festival and the history of jazz in Vermont. And John Gennari from UVM English department has 2 interns that will be working for BCA all summer. And as we launch things this afternoon, it'll continue throughout the summer, and we'll have 2 fabulous interns with us, Doug Finney and Nani Clemens, who will work throughout the summer to find all those artifacts and documents and files and photographs and old film clips and things that we want to make sure we can bring together and put a collection together at UVM, at the library. And the Fletcher Free Library will be involved as well. But what is Jazz Lab? That's the question I've heard a lot this week. And really, Jazz Lab is sort of like a little mini festival within the festival that is about experimentation and a way to bring all of the different art forms that have been influenced by jazz or collaborative projects with jazz and explore them. And this can be concerts and films and panel discussions and art exhibitions and a lot more. For those of you who were with us yesterday, it was phenomenal to see Jalen playing to the exhibition downstairs. That was quite a treat. And there's been other gems throughout the week as we've watched a lot of these discussions unfold. This exhibition in this room here is called From the Archives, and it's featuring the photography of Luke Autry and Brian Drurer and Mark Harland, and there are dozens and hundreds of more photographs that are a part of this, and this is just a small selection for you. And as I said, we're working with the college students to help bring this archive project together. And they are overseeing a group of young high school students that are called the Jazz Messengers. And they are collecting, they're going to all of the concert and events, and then going back and writing about these events. And they have their own Instagram account that's called BTV Jazz Messengers. So if you want to see how others are interpreting these days' activities, please take a look. A big shout out to New England Federal Credit Union, our presenting sponsor of the festival this year. and to Media Factory for providing audio and video recording to support this panel. So we're very proud to host this auspicious panel today with our fearless moderator, Fran Stoddard. And I also, yes, absolutely. And I also want to acknowledge that Ken Grillo is not here with us. He's not able to be, but he worked very hard to set this panel up and did a fabulous job of bringing us all together. Without further ado, Fran Stoddard is a national award-winning producer and director of educational and public relations videos. She's worked as a communications and PR professor at Champlain College, contributes frequently to VPR, and a former co-host of VPR's Switchboard, VPT's program Profiles. She's an avid performer, though these days not as avid in terms of your work with the Tycho group, but I hear they're always trying to get you back.
Again.
So Franny, take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doreen. So it's great to be here, and this is a very exciting initiative to really look back. I mean, it is kind of amazing that it's been 39 years. And we want to shed light on the evolution of the fabulous Burlington Discover Jazz Festival that Doreen, of course, and members of this panel were all there at the beginning, and other people in this room. So we want you, hopefully, to share your stories too. If they come up, there'll be time for that. You all have made this vibrant and successful festival, and so we're going to have a glimpse of what it was and where it might be going. What we're going to do is I'm going to speak with the panelists. I have a couple of questions for them, so we get a flavor of what it has been like for them. Then there'll be a chance for them to ask each other questions or comment on what each other is saying, and something might pop up even as they're saying it. That's okay. This is an improv situation here, and then we want to engage some of you that are in this room. So there might be a story or an addition or a question for some of the panel, and we encourage you to be a part of that. Though I am here, the main thing that I do, besides, I don't know, this other stuff, maybe it's the type of drumming that helped me, I'm going to keep people moving along. So just know that that's my job. I'm not being rude, or I am, but that's my job. Okay, so quickly, who do we have here? Of course, it is really a shame. Ken Grillo is so unhappy. He got COVID. That's a very long time. He was ready to come to over 12, 20 performances. He can't do any of that, and he's feeling fine now, but he can't go anywhere for another 5 days. So he's very disappointed. Also, Rob Guerrina is how you pronounce that. Very sad. He was one of the founding members of Just Jazz with Larry McCrory, and he is not well enough to come today, and we really miss his presence. He was going to be on this panel as well. So we wish both Ken and Rob well. So who do we have on this panel? We have Rich Davidian, who is, were you in that? You were in that video. Yep. Yeah. Woodwind musician and teacher who's led the Vermont Jazz Ensemble since 1976 and has played with the Temptations and the Who. I loved that. I'm just taking little snippets.
Stage, anyway.
As well as a slew, of course, of Vermont musicians. And then we have Will Patton, who is a multi-instrumentalist, composer, band leader, and also first showed up on the Vermont jazz scene in the early 70s and is well known as a jazz, bass, and mandolin performer, which is just awesome. You bring mandolin jazz. He's been a band leader since the age of 13. Love that one. And has opened for major acts, including Van Morrison, Ray Charles, Bonnie Raitt, John McLaughlin, just to name a few. And he spent 25 years focused on gypsy and Brazilian jazz. Paul Asbell, jazz guitarist, composer, everybody knows Paul. And teacher has performed on the Vermont jazz scene. Also, since the early 70s, he's played on scores of CDs, including 3 solo albums. From jazz fusion to blues and American roots, he has played and recorded with legends, and he is certainly one of them in our state of Vermont. We welcome him. And certainly last but not least, Jenni Johnson, also here since the early 70s, jazz singer, also a counselor. She was getting a master's degree at UVM when she landed here. She's has assembled countless ensembles of Vermont's finest and just does an amazing job of that and is a favorite on the Vermont scene. She has also sung in far-flung places, as far as we were just talking about Yaroslavl in Russia, Paris, and Montreal. She's also an amazing community organizer. So we have an awesome panel here. So here, yes, thank you. So for this first one, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go that way again, and then I'll probably change and move around. But we will start out at the far end from me again with Rich. So I want all of you to just reflect on, from your point of view, how did jazz take root in Vermont? You know, take us back there. What do you remember about where you were when you heard jazz in the 70s or 80s? What influences were here or coming through Vermont that you recall? So go for it. Minute or two. We're going to try to keep this not too long.
My wife Shawn and I moved to Vermont in 1972, and I was involved in some of the first Discover Jazz festivals, which were, I think, at that time a 3-day festival, a weekend, rather than a whole 10-day thing. But it was a different festival then. I remember that the jazz that was played in town was more widely dispersed. I remember singles playing on buses, and you know, and in marketplaces, and just little
At the
duos at
airport.
the
Airport, right.
Exactly. I was thinking about a particular moment when Will and I were playing in a group called Stolen Moments, which was a little like just jazz, some of the same players, but we had a trombone with Bear Irwin and myself. We were playing at the airport and playing a few tunes in the lobby, and who comes off a plane but the Modern Jazz Quartet? And they're standing in front of us, and we're sort of, they're dumbfounded, wondering where she does. Play something, play something. And so, we finally did play something before they had to get into a cab and leave. As for the rest of Vermont and jazz at that time, I was trying to remember the name of a club in Montpelier. I'm from the Montpelier area. There was I want to say Jailhouse Common, but that doesn't take...
Gitanos?
Gitanos.
Carlos Montoya's place.
Exactly, that's it, yeah, I remember that. That was one of the first places I recall. I remember people like Andy Shapiro playing around in those, you know, in some of those places. I wasn't really much into that, playing in that scene at that point, but my background was largely in education. I taught at Montpelier for 38 years and was rather involved in all the jazz elements that the Vermont music education system brought to the fore, and including groups on Church Street, and still have that these days. So
Cool.
that's the side of it that I'm more familiar with, is the education.
Right. Well, that's an important part of the foundation. I mean, why here? But anyway, we'll move through. We'll get to Will. But I would like to ask, if this is distracting, this isn't really Vermont Jazz Festival. It's lovely and it's kind of hip, but we can also let it go. So Will, what for you laid that foundation for jazz here?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this question, and first of all, the beginning of jazz in Vermont, who knows what that is, right?
Right.
I mean, it didn't start with us, that's for sure. So I was like from rock bands as a kid, and then I got up here and played in sort of more R&B situations, horn bands, soul bands, things like that, and then with John Castle, which got me more and more into jazz. But I'd been listening to it since the days with this group called the Fat Band that I played with a wonderful singer named Leroy Roberson, who I roomed with back in Philly, and he turned me on to jazz. He put on records all day long, and I didn't know anything about this. Lee Morgan, Horace Silver, you know, that kind of stuff, that sort of 50s. And I just, at some point, something clicked, and that's all I wanted to hear. So I listened and listened, but I didn't play it so much. I played what John played, more R&B, Van Morrison, some jazz. And then what changed everything for me, in 1979, I think it was, I got a call from this guy, Rob Guerrina, who was a piano player, and they were looking for a bass player. And I'd never met him, and he had a gig at Dylan's in the mall, if anybody remembers that place.
Yeah.
Wow.
Didn't last too long, but so I shows up. I don't know these guys, right? I mean, I knew of Larry, of course, and I think Sam Armstrong was on drums at that time,
Sam.
and Larry, of course, and Rob. So these guys never rehearsed, you know. You just show up, and it's a gig, and that's like the old joke. I'd like to introduce the band, and I started playing, and I was amazed by these guys. This was the stuff I was listening to, that sort of style of pop piano, and Larry, of course, the big tenor. And I must have passed the audition because I played with him for the next 30 years. But that just introduced me to a whole world of all these. We have lists of players here, which maybe we'll get to, and that whole other side of the music scene in Burlington, which is the more jazz folks. Rich, Bear, Irwin, and wow, there's so many of them. The Mark Hannigans, the John
John
Hannigans.
Hannigan, yeah.
Anyway, whole list. Mark Lamphere, I'm thinking. A huge list of folks, Zipaloy, but we'll get to
Yeah.
all those. But that was it for me. That was,
Awesome.
at least when I started, you know, discovering
That's
jazz, so
right,
to
that's right.
speak.
And Jeff, we'll get to you. I wanted to hear what the panelist says, and then I'm really interested in what was coming up for you. So Paul, what was that foundational stuff for you, or
Well-
places, or whatever?
Well, like Will, I'm going to pass on the idea of the roots of jazz in Vermont, because all I know is what I saw starting when I moved from Chicago here in '71. And I moved, I was playing 6 nights a week in Chicago, playing blues and R&B and as much jazz as I was capable of playing at that time. And but when I moved here, it was basically to kind of get away from all that. I had no idea that I would be moving to a place where I would put, you know, where there would have been roots in jazz and that I might have even been part of it. I was never on my radar screen. You know, I figured I would probably just get a job in a sawmill or something. I don't know what the heck I was thinking, but it certainly was not, I'm going to move up here and like, yeah, find a jazz scene. Couldn't have been farther from that. And after kind of have been living off the grid more or less for about a year or something like that, and pretty literally off the grid, I started playing with a guy who was not far from me. He lived in Waterbury Center, Stowe at the time. His name was Lard Duggan. He was a pianist. And the amount of jazz that I had been working on and trying to get even a vague foothold in, Lar propelled quite a bit. And he showed me a lot of tunes, sort of critiqued certain things that he thought, you know, that's not going to work in this music, but this will, and you know, you should be doing more of that, and whatever. And we started playing together quite a bit, and one day, Lar said, why don't you and me go together? I have a friend I'd like you to meet. And we went, I don't remember where it was, Hanksville maybe, someplace. It was all central Vermont. And there was this guy named Larry McCrory, whose house we went to and played. And Larry was, in a lot of ways, like the people that I knew in Chicago. I had no clue when I moved to Vermont that there would be anybody like Larry. And I'm talking about skin color and background and musical essence and stuff like that. And it was mind-blowing. It was just so exciting that maybe I haven't given all of that up. And at any rate, so I'm only saying that because that was a kind of a significant entry to me to the fact that there was something of a jazz. There were jazz people here, you know, for sure. And whether or not there was a jazz scene, there were jazz people. I joined a band that Will had been in, John Castle's band, not long afterwards, and from there started working more and more with people that were kind of part of a pre-existing scene here. I do remember one thing, which is that I played a couple of gigs with two guys, Roger Brown, the drummer, and Jesse Tiller, B3 player. And my recollection, I'm pretty sure I'm right, was that it was at the hi-hat, which probably people don't know, but that's where Nectar's is now. And they had something that's very weird to us now, but was very common at the time, which is the bandstand was inside the bar. And that's where the B3 was, and that's where one set up. And I think Jesse played there a lot. I only played maybe three or four gigs doing that. But anyway, it kind of and a lot of this stuff was here in Vermont because of the proximity of Montreal.
Right.
And that was and I was puzzled by it. And then that had nothing to do with Larry, but that had everything to do with Jesse Diller and a number of others.
Right. And John Kessel was mainly kind of in the valley and Stowe and kind of brought it to that part. It wasn't necessarily up here in Chittenden County.
Well, very much, he was based in Franklin County, of course.
Oh, okay.
He still lives to this day.
Yeah.
And a lot of the gigs we played were there. And it was very interesting because that's a very rural area. And the people that John knew and the people that were huge fans of the band were often farmers and garage mechanics and, you know, day laborers and just folks from, you know, if you had said, so you're a jazz fan, I think a lot of those people would have said, well, no, but we like John. And it was really kind of an awakening for me that, like, these things could coexist. That's one of the things about Vermont that was kind of fascinating.
Thank you, Paul. And Jenni, what was this place like for you, and how did you see jazz being something that belonged here?
Oh, jeez, crow. Not even. I came up here for nothing to do with music. Good answer. Okay. I was at University of Vermont, and some musicians there, after classes, would just go into the dorms and just do some jam sessions. And one young man said, let's try and get a gig together. I said, sure. So anyway, we put a rock and roll band together called Acme. We play, you pay. And that was our line. And still is that line. But as time went on, I finished a degree, and people were asking me to do any jazz, blah, blah, blah. But where I grew up in the city, we didn't divide ourselves with jazz and blues or black and white. We were people, we were doing music, and it all meshed together. I kind of, for the Vermont scene, I heard a lot about Will Patton. At that time I knew him as Bill Patton. Heard a lot about Paul Asbell. I heard a lot about Jeff, about all these musicians, Chuck and all of them. And every once in a while I would go to the clubs and hear you guys play. But I'm a vocalist. So for instrumentalists, you're nice, but there weren't any vocalists. So it's like, I'm not that impressed. They weren't happy with that kind of comment. But I just kind of eased into it. Someone was asking me about Billie Holiday, and I loved her music. I loved Ella's music, Betty Carter's music. It was pretty difficult for a female to break into this male-dominated jazz scene in Vermont. I'm a New Yorker, I live in Vermont, I love Vermont, but hardcore, I'm a New Yorker, and I pushed my way in, and I was accepted because I am talented, and people would say after a gig, it's like, you know, you don't need all those musicians with you. And I said, okay, I need some of them though to get the gig started. But as now there aren't that many female vocalists in Vermont who are doing either jazz or blues, and it's still a little difficult. But once these guys get to know me, and you know, after doing the reading about Billie Holiday and Ella hanging out with all the guys in the clubs, and they had to use stronger words than I'm using now because they're being filmed. Now it makes sense to me. The sad part is, again, there still aren't enough female, whether they're vocalist or musician, represented.
Yeah, and we've lost some great ones.
And we lost,
We've lost
the
some
few
great
that we have, we've lost some great ones.
Yeah.
So I was blessed with the instrument that I'm learning how to play. I continue to learn how to play it. I'm a band leader, but I have to have the attitude. You're still a woman, but you have to have a strong, convincing attitude and argue with a musician like Rob Guerrina that he's playing Moonlight in Vermont incorrectly for a vocalist. We had a big argument about that. So I went out and bought the sheet music and said, this is how you should be playing it. And Rob looked at me like, oh, you're right. So every once in a while, you had to put on my big girl panties and have the guys understand the inanimate instrument like a guitar or a bass, they play things one way, but a vocalist, this instrument has to be used in so many different levels, but you have to be convinced of that. And the most convincing thing for me was to have the musicians playing the key that I sing. And that's still a difficult thing to get across.
You figured it out, because I've heard you play a lot, and
It was
work.
It was rough.
It's work.
It's a lot of work, but it's so rewarding. Music is just such a rewarding thing for anyone to get involved with.
You know, Jeff, you had a strong reaction to how jazz started around here. Did you want to comment to that?
Yeah, there's a man named Bob Blanchard who has,
Yeah, just tell us the story.
a man named Bob Blanchard has a Facebook page called Burlington Area History. And
Oh, there you go. I knew they were not doing one of those things. Thank you, Doreen.
Doing her thing.
Is it on?
just wanted the one that was off.
That's better.
Is this gonna work?
Is it on?
Is it on?
No.
Here, you keep using this and I'll play it. Okay.
Sorry. Jeez, sorry. So Bob Blanchard has this page called Burlington Area History, which is fascinating about all the various buildings, all the various neighborhoods, all the various ethnic input into Burlington community. And I had seen an article from one of the papers about a particular man who had played jazz years ago. And today I went back to that site and found the Duke Ellington Orchestra performing at the Bayside Pavilion in Mallett's Bay in 1935 to an amazing thousands of people. And another appearance was Cab Calloway in 1941, who was signing autographs at the Hi-Hat and was playing at Memorial Auditorium and said, come on, meet Cab at the bus and follow him around town, and he'll be signing autographs at the Hi-Hat Lounge, and he'll be playing at Burlington Memorial Auditorium. And this photo has Cab Calloway, two commentators from WCAX, and Cozy Cole sitting here in Burlington in 1941. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. We were not the progenitors of the jazz scene in Burlington, and you'll have to go back way past Sterling Weed and Mike Martello and Tom Stanziola, and these people who were here long before we were. And like the first jazz I saw was these guys.
Thank you. Wonderful stories. That's so rich. Love that. So then we're gonna follow up that with just a lightning round of your favorite memory of the Jazz Festival. One memory. Jenni, we're starting with you.
I met Betty Carter. I had just come back to Vermont, and there was a club called, it was in the basement. Oh, it's no longer here, but I met Betty Carter, and I just, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Paul.
Well, there used to be, I don't think that that's part of the festival anymore, but there used to be, quote, a jam session as kind of a featured thing, and it was often at Contours.
Yeah.
And I often was doing that myself with, I was trying to sort it out, with Dave Grippo's band, the Grippos. But at least one year, there may have been more than 1 year, but at least 1 year, the Unknown Blues Band with Big Joe and Chuck and all of the rest of our crew, we were tapped to be the sort of, house band is not quite right, but to start the thing off. And I remember that was the year when the Rebirth Black Brass Band from New Orleans was here, and I and a number of the other guys had all been to New Orleans many times by then. So what my curiosity was like the vibe of what New Orleans celebration is. Does that actually, do you have to be in New Orleans to get that, or do musicians who come somewhere else, like the Burlington, Vermont, will they bring it in? And the latter proved to be the case, because it was such a party. It was just something else, and that is one of my favorites. Let's call it my favorite.
Okay, awesome.
The jazz
Thanks.
session, right?
And what comes up for you?
Well, my favorite thing is two things, actually. Can I
Okay,
Yeah, okay.
And one of them is, because I
We're
love
losing
Brazilian music, was Anat Cohen. This was about 4 years ago at the Flynn Space. Oh, my God. And the other one, I think this is part of the Jazz Festival, was when Larry and I and Bob opened for Toots Thielmans and Kenny Werner did a duo at the Flynn Space, or at the Flynn. And just hearing Toots' stories and his grandfather Belgian accent backstage was some of them so sweetly told, but X-rated. And so I can't really tell you them. Later we'll talk, but anyway, it's just wonderful.
Yeah, I think there'll be some conversations after this. Rich, how about you?
I'll see you two and rage you one. Very quickly, the Vermont Jazz Ensemble played a number of years, the Saturday night big dance in Memorial Auditorium or something, probably a 5-hour dance or so, and that was always fun. Big crowds and just a lot of good times. I remember also seeing Joshua Redmond, who's here this year. This is the first time I discovered jazz. He played, I think, at Memorial Auditorium, and just out of Harvard. And I recognized who he was, and he's been one of my favorite tenor players ever since. And just a really smart guy, besides being so musically intuitive. And what was the third one? Oh, the third one, if you want to stay at the end, I'll show you a video of lately Trombone Shorty from a couple years ago showing up at Ray Vega's gig at the Juniper, is it?
Yeah.
And playing one of Ray's trumpets. And they had a little trumpet duo, which might be worth seeing at the end of this today.
Wow. Yeah, okay. So now we'll see if you can answer this or not. But most of you are from away and brought training and established skills with you. I want to know how you were mentored once you came to Vermont. If you've had a little sense of this from some of you. How do you continue or see a mentoring tradition continuing for all the multiple generations that are coming? So just some thoughts about mentoring in jazz and the jazz scene in Vermont in particular. Did someone mentor you, or do you see this really, is it still rich, or do you want more?
It could always be more.
Always be more,
I mean,
certainly.
there could, but yeah.
So I see Will leaning forward. I'm going to
one
start
of
with
the
you.
thoughts I had was, I don't know if it was conscious mentorship going on, but it happened. I was younger than all these folks when I first started playing with just jazz, and one thing that really struck me was like my generation or just behind me, there was this thing called the Real Book. It's like a fake book, right? And there was these Berkeley players, and you said, "Oh yeah, all of me," and they'd open the book. But the guys that I ended up playing with were 10 or so years older, and there was never an open book. It was just all here, and I think that's why I got the gigs I did then, because I knew a lot of tunes. I was just at the right place at the right time. But the thought of Larry saying, "Oh yeah, all of me," it just didn't, it wasn't there. And all the players that we played with, Mike Martello and Charlie Duncan and all those folks, it was never an open book on stage. It was all. And that, to me, mentored me in that, oh, that's the way to play.
Until a vocalist came on scene.
Well, but We couldn't use the real book then because the vocalist gets to say what key.
Oh, stop. True.
True that.
But I really agree with Will on that, and I know for me, starting jazz in Chicago, it was not the first music that I started playing, but the music I first started playing was clearly a folklore, and blues is a folklore of certain people, and jazz has become viewed as something which is quite different, very much an intellectual and academic exercise, but I never experienced it that way. I experience it as sort of a folklore, much like what you're talking about, where you know the tunes, and you'll also kind of maybe remember what the solo that Coleman Hawkins actually played on that tune was, or something like that. You heard it, it was almost a form of pop music, and later players, after jazz academia came, to be a very potent thing, that has changed it. And I think there needs to be a reminder for all of us of kind of like the folklore of jazz as well. And so where you hear it growing up and that kind of thing, it makes much more sense when you...
Really interesting. Thank you. Jenni, should I move on to the next question?
My mentorship came from the musicians in New Orleans. They taught me they gave me more confidence because I was questioning. I knew I had the skill, but I was questioning my skill because of not as much support from the Vermont musicians that I got from these gentlemen in New Orleans who were in their 70s and 80s, and I loved it because they called me a little girl. So, that was all good for me. But I didn't have as much mentorship as I would have liked to have had from the musicians in Vermont. And it gets back to, again, there are male vocalists, but the female vocalists still have to struggle more to get the respect and get the respect and confidence. So mine came from out of state.
Right. Okay. And Rich, you look like you have something you want to
Yeah, I'm
add.
going to take a little different angle on that. Again, just because I've been involved in the education scene for so long. I have seen over those 40 years a number of young musicians turn into professional musicians. I think let me take a step back and say that I think a lot of Vermont's jazz history is connected with the names of people. And I could list a long list of people I have right here that mean jazz to me, whether it's Discover Jazz or other places, in fact other areas of Vermont as well. But if you think about the musicians who came through the jazz education system, including my own two sons, Joe Davidian, PJ Davidian, people that they play with, Jennifer Hartswick, Nick Casarino, Connor Elms, I wouldn't know where to stop here. There's a lot of names. And Brian McCarthy. These are all people who came through the Vermont education system and through the music education system and through the Flynn jazz festivals. They've all been involved with that. They've been involved with the all-state jazz ensembles for years, for decades. And they're now the mainstay, the foundation sort of the Vermont jazz scene, or many of them are. And so something to be said about what has happened in mentoring them, that has happened in a more formal way than what Will was talking about and Paul locally with older musicians. But it has paid off for Vermont, I think.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for bringing that in. So one more question, then I really want to open it up to all of you. Of course, jazz is a universal language for all musicians. It's all about music at its core and foundation that's African American. And as actually a kid from Cleveland and a diverse background, the festival was like so important to me. It was like there was this energy that was really missing in Vermont for me. So it was thrilling. And this is a big question, way too much to unpack, and could be a whole course. But just to touch on, how did race enter into the scene? what were the issues of playing as white musicians behind Big Joe Burrell or Larry McCrory, or for you, Jenna, playing with a bunch of white guys? You know, there's also the gender issue, which you have brought up. What was great about this stuff? What was difficult to navigate, and how have things changed over the years? Paul, a stab?
Well, just kind of personalizing it, like I said, when Lar and I went over to Larry's house, it was for me, there was a recognition on my part that Larry it turned out much later, I found out that he and I grew up in the same neighborhood in Chicago. He was obviously a lot older than I was, but, you know, area of Woodlawn in Chicago. You know, we knew many of the same people, but he kind of, and the same clubs and stuff like that. I didn't know that at the time. But, boy, that was a different, that was a world that was very, very familiar with me, to me, but I didn't expect to see it here in Vermont. And there are so many of the people that I think are part of the jazz world that I know now, they learn, as you said, they learn their skills elsewhere, and they kind of brought them to Vermont. So it wasn't kind of, it didn't come out of the dairy barns and the soil of Vermont. And it was, that is not what the music, you know, we call jazz is. But people have brought it here, and I have to say just very quickly that race plays a part in every aspect of American life, and you cannot avoid it, and it's worth talking about. But that said, the people that I play with up here, who, you know, black or white, there was never a sense in which we were coming at it from different places. It's either whether you could play or not, whether you express yourself, whether you could communicate to audiences or not, and that race element was never a thing at all. It was a way of making it so we really are all kind of the same. If you can play, you can play. If you can't, you can't.
Duke Ellington never established himself as a black entertainer. He was an entertainer. He happened to play jazz. And what I see in the music world, I don't see the color of a musician's skin. If he sucks, and I will let him know. And, you know, so that question, I saw that question, and for me, it hasn't played much of a role. I live in Vermont. Predominantly, it's people whose skin color is different than mine. I have to accept that. But I also know that some of the musicians, and I play with all the guys here, this person, that almost, and yeah, our skin colors are different, but our music is what makes us enjoy what we do. And it's not until you go to some place, I don't know where, Hitsville or someplace in Florida, where you will then be more aware of people's skin color. But for musicians, I just don't, it's not being a female is a big issue than the skin color. How about that?
Yeah.
I think one thing that I think virtually everybody in the jazz world knows, and it might as well get said, jazz originated as a black music.
Irish and African American.
Well, there are all kinds of things, right? But,
And that's being celebrated for
Yeah.
this festival in particular, so it
Yeah.
seemed, you know, just,
so I think
put the question out there.
any white kid or
Right.
white adult who plays the music also kind of knows that.
Yeah.
And so that's never in dispute.
Yeah. So questions, comments? Yes, Virginia. And do we have that microphone out here, or do you have a question, or would you like to make a comment?
Well, I wanted to make a comment about your question about race
Yes.
in the jazz scene here.
Sure.
Because Larry told me a story.
Yeah, there's a mic, and I think this is, thank you.
This is from the past.
Put it in your mouth.
It's on, just get it closer.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. No, I don't think it's on.
Yeah. Go ahead, just try again, because he's working on the volume.
Oh, there we go. Yes. So Larry told me a story. This was some years ago. the Just Jazz used to play at Hawke's Point, which was a bar up here. And David Morwood, who was a medical student and one of Larry's mentees, I'd say, was the drummer, but he arranged all the gigs for them. And it was a very popular gig. People came from Montreal and everybody loved it. And Larry was playing sax. And I've forgotten who was playing bass there at the time.
Randy Miller?
Maybe Randy Miller. And anyhow, the owner, or the person who owned that area, one day said to Dave Moore, old Dave said, "How's it going?" And he said, "Oh, it's going terrifically." He said, "It's really good, but couldn't you get rid of that black person, you know?"
Saxophone player.
The saxophone player. Couldn't you get rid of the saxophone player? And Dave Morwood was never short of an idea, said, "Oh," he said, "don't worry, Joe," or whatever his name was. He said, "He's going on sabbatical, you know, next, in a month or two, and so we'll be able to take care of the saxophone player." So Larry went away, and David arranged for Big Joe to come and play.
Oh my.
Black man.
So
Well,
our,
very, very shortly,
This guy's gonna-
very shortly thereafter that I first met Big Joe at Hawke's Point and managed to convince him that he might want to come down. We would love to have him come down to the Wednesday blues gig that we were doing at Hunt's. And that was the beginning of what we now know as the Unknown Blues Band.
Wow. That's history. That's history. Any other comments, questions? I think there's trying to be a fix with the microphone, but you can always steal mine. Yes.
I had a comment. I was thinking about Rich was saying earlier of you know, the areas of Vermont, whatever. And I was from Massachusetts, and I moved up here in the early '90s. And what I knew of Vermont jazzing was the Vermont Jazz Center in Brattleboro.
Oh.
And so when I was thinking earlier today about the legends of Vermont, you know, Eugene Elman.
Eugene Newman,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Newman, yeah.
It's I mean, maybe
You know,
we
he
can.
really has established, you know, something down there, and I was very happy that we were able to connect with him over the years and have him at the jazz festival and some of his students, whoever. But you know, sometimes we think it's all here. It's not.
Right.
It's right all over Vermont, right?
Right. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, there's another scene in the Rutland area. There's the whole White River in New Hampshire, you know, set of musicians, and even in Northeast Kingdom, there's a small contingent of
Bakersfield.
and Bakersfield. I forgot about Bakersfield. Yeah.
Hotbed.
But they're all passions there.
Yes, please.
Wasn't there jazz at Sneakers once a week?
Oh, yeah.
Sneakers
And
Jazz
what-
Band.
12 years, every Tuesday.
And didn't, I mean, that seemed to nurture jazz, I thought, around here a lot.
At least in Winooski.
Yeah, yeah, people came from all over to go there.
Is that mic working now, do you think?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay.
Can I make another observation about whether black or white or older musician or mentors, all part of all of those questions, but for this Basie 100-year celebration, I ended up going to Big Joe's house and working with him for a while and talking about what arrangements we might want to do and all kinds of things like that. But most importantly, and I'm sure some other people have had this experience, he had great stories about his travels, a lot of travels, the fact that he always was known for playing with Basie, but he never did. Basie heard him playing in his combo, and that's where that connection was made. But
And he hired him for his club in Harlem.
yeah,
In other words, he wanted Big Joe's band
Yeah.
to be the kind of front of house. Yeah.
but it was just, I guess the point of that is just such kind mentorship and, you know, sort of clarifying some of those talking about those old tenor players and what he liked about them and how they were models for him and that sort of thing was, you know, just very enlightening and very powerful. You know, you don't get a chance to get that very often, and I was lucky to be there, and, you know, our different colors had nothing to do with it at all. It was, you know, it was about the music and about the people, and it was just very encouraging.
Thank you, Rich. Yes,
I don't think I can find it, but I have, for example, one of the rehearsals we had and jam session that he came to, I recorded that, and I can't seem to find it, but I'll look.
Okay. Leslie McCrory has, Wells, has a comment, but I also just wanted to say, for the record, the Sneakers Jazz Band was brought up as something that was significant in this area's history of jazz for 12 years.
Hello? That's working? Well, I can project. I just
So
want to
talk into it in case it turns on so we can get it for the television.
Okay. Great.
Or use this one.
Hi. I just want to thank the musicians that are up here and musicians that are out here and all over Burlington, because you've certainly made my father's life much richer, and you made my life much richer, but you made Vermont a much better place to be. And you've given your time, you give you donate your time anytime there's a need. And I just think this is, again, has been a much richer experience living in Vermont, and you've made it a better place just because you're here and loving this craft, loving this genre that we all love together. And so I just want to thank you very much for that.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we just have a few minutes left. Chaz, I can't, you have to say something.
Okay, I'm gonna use this mic, being a recording engineer. I just wanted to quickly tell a little anecdote about people's respect for the festival, and that we might take for granted because we have this little microcosm of great players around here, and they are all playing every night practically during the festival. But I had an experience that I shared with Paul, and where we had played, I think it was the, and maybe Jenny, you can tell me, was the Betty Carter, was she at the first festival?
Not
Sarah
before,
Vaughan.
I thought it was
No, I know,
Alex
that was,
Gerald, I think was the
that was
Ella.
the second
Ella.
time. Yeah, what was it?
It was Sarah Vaughan in 1983.
Oh, was it Sarah Vaughan?
Yeah, when, anybody remember when Betty Carter was here the first time?
Sometime in the 80s.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we were fortunate enough to be playing that night with Big Joe, and we were playing down at a place called The Front. And she came down after her set, I guess at the Flynn, and sat in with us, and it was like really kind of the perfect, scenario that you dream of, not just as a player, but as an audience and as a, festival organizer, where there's this, great interaction between one of the great singers of all time and us little guys. And she was very, very gracious, and Jody got up and sang, and it was really a fun night. Well, fast forward a number of years later, the festival wanted to sort of reprise that whole event, and it was a little staged this time because she was playing again at the Flynn, and we were booked at the Metronome, and so it was sort of understood from organizationally that, and it might have even been in her contract, I don't know, but that she would then leave the Flynn and come join us. And so we were, had great expectations, and it went pretty much as planned. I was actually mixing the show, so she got there before I did, and I had somebody sitting in for me, and Martin Egan. And but anyway, so we had another nice night. It didn't have that, kind of serendipity and spontaneity that it did the first time. But anyway, it was a really great night. Well, anyway, that would have been in June of 1995. And 6 months later, my band got booked to play, you know, with Paul and Big Joe and at the Utrecht Blues Festival in the Netherlands. And so we flew over there and we did our show at this really nice venue, and it was like a very large cultural center right in the middle of Utrecht. And we, as we typically would do when we did gigs overseas, we'd like take a week and sometimes a month off, because they don't really care when you fly in and fly out, and they pay for your airfare. And so we just like, well, let's, you know, go poke around Europe for a week or two. And so we did that. This time we took a week, I think. And anyway, so when we all came back on, you know, a week later, and we had to, you know, get our things, all of our instruments and everything, and fly back together. And so we ended up, I got back the day before that we were supposed to meet, and it turns out that Betty was playing that night at the same place that we played. So I thought, well, you know, and we were staying in the hotel right next door, so it was a kind of a no-brainer to go catch her. And so anyway, she did a great show, and afterwards I thought, well, you know, I should go up and, you know, introduce myself and try, you know, I was certain that she wouldn't remember me, but I waited in line, because she did a thing where she had these beautiful posters that she was signing for people. And so I waited in line, and when I was about number 10 in this really long line, she looked up at me and she like winked, you know. Oh, you know. So when it got to be my turn in line, I went up and she said, "You play with that gentleman, Mr. Burrell, don't you?" And so 6 months later, she remembered, you know, her experience here, and I just thought that, you know, can't think of how many tens of thousands of people she had seen in between, but it was a testimony to her experience here and how well treated she was by the Jazz Festival.
Awesome, Chuck. Thank you so much. Well, yeah, actually I was going to turn it over to you for just a minute. It is 5:30. I am a radio television person, so I'm aware of these things. And I'm turning this mic over to somebody who uses it very well. But you were also there at the very beginning. But you can say whatever came to mind now.
I just want to comment on this question of mentoring, because when I think of all of the young musicians that have come to play as a part of the festival over all these years, it is so significant in their lives to work all year long. And this festival is when they get to come to the big city, Burlington, and be part of a jazz festival. And it's a dream come true. And also they come and they're given free passes to see the whole festival and to come to any event they'd like. And so there is a mentorship that happens there. And those jam sessions that you were referring to that were done for probably 18 years or 19 years, they'd come in and they'd be carrying their instruments and so shy as they walked in, and you all were on the stage and playing away, and they'd be encouraged to come out and join you. And it was marvelous. Those times were extraordinary for them, for all of us. They got to experience it. So there was a lot of mentorship going on all the time.
Thank you so much. This feels like it's just really the beginning. We have barely tapped the surface of the history of this incredible festival. And I know these musicians, you know, all of them have at least a dozen other gigs to go to, and one just slipped out. That's how these things go. I can give you all 30 seconds for that last thing. If like, oh, I meant to say this, but just for the panel only. And then we will close out this session, and we hope to continue this and really picking up the history of these wonderful, wonderful 39 years.
Okay, countdown. Anyway, we opened for the Jazz Fest at Lunig's last Friday night, and it reminded me of the trip that we went to representing Burlington's sister city. Larry Corey was there, Rob Guerrina that was part of the group, and the accolades we got there felt the same that we got last Friday. So rewarding, so rewarding. Music is just the heel of everything, and as much as I complain about there aren't as many females as I would like, I'm still happy to represent for the women.
Let's get some more on the scene. And yes, from Russia to Burlington. We love you guys.
Hey.
Okay.
Well, the first thing that occurs to me, and it's not a gripe, but it is an observation, which is that and when somebody just brought up the Sneakers Band, which again had that 12-year run of Tuesdays, for our perspective, we were like, jazz is happening all year round here. There are people who kind of pack up in the frozen winter and schlep down to, Sneakers in order to be able to keep this thing going. And so the Discover Jazz Fest, from our point of view, often struck us as like, oh right, it's like Black History Month or something. This is the time that we start memorializing something for like these 3 days. Now it's 10 days, that's wonderful. But at any rate, this stuff goes, for people whose lives are made in doing this music, it's a 365 thing, and it's important not to let Discover Jazz Festival be overriding the reality that this is something that goes on all the time. Time for no jazz. See you next year. Musicians.
Well, Chuck's story reminded me of, this touches on mentorship a little bit, and also that deep connection with history. When Ella was at the Flynn, her trumpet player was Roy Eldridge, Little Jazz, and we were playing in a band called Chet Arthur 5, at the Radisson, whatever it is now, the old Radisson, and we did Leonard Hendricks and Ross and some jazz and a lot of vocal jazz, and we had a trumpet player, Al Zansler, was playing with us. And so Roy Eldridge was staying there, and he comes in after his show, and, you want to sit in, Yes, sure. And to the Radisson's credit, it was near closing time, of course, and they said, you guys take a break, and we're going to close out the audience because of liquor laws and so on. And so they sort of did that, but sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. People sort of slipped back in. And so after hours jam went on for about an hour and a half. And he was so gracious, not to mention he drank us all under the table. It was remarkable. And you felt this deep connection with the history of jazz. I mean, he goes back so far.
Yeah.
And he was great. He was great help. This was Ella.
Yeah, wow. Rich, a final word for you.
Yeah, just to pick up on what Will was saying. The Vermont Jazz Ensemble, 17-piece band, had some running gigs as well. There was a club in Stowe called Jackson's, and BK Clark's, I forget which one it was first, but it was both of those clubs. And we played Monday nights forever. We played in Rutland at Gigi's. We played at Halverson's for a couple of years on Monday nights whatsoever. So it's there. Look for it. Find it.
GG's?
And in Rutland.
What's a strip club?
No, but it did burn down at some point, so it's not there anymore. And if you would like, as people are leaving, I can show you the trombone shorty clip.
Awesome. Okay, why don't we just do that? And shout out to the venues that support jazz also. For all of you that go, to the venues that go, I'm doing jazz. Vermont. I see you guys out there. Thank you all so much for everything you have brought to us and to jazz in Vermont. And thank all of you for being here today. And let's continue picking up on this history.
Isn't she good?
Yeah.